At this point, we should have completed the strategic alternatives, and now we need to develop an analysis so we can select the one for recommendation. We're going to try to deal with the financial analysis that is required for each of the strategic alternatives. I'm going to discuss several of them here, and by no means will the alternatives be limited to what you may have chosen. I'm going to pick some that would be common. You may pick a strategic alternative that is not in here. Regardless, you would need to develop your financial analysis and answer the questions to be able to justify your recommendation. What we're going to do is take a look at the units here, and one of the first alternatives, or an alternative, would be develop a second unit. Wu stated that it would take between $300,000 and $700,000 to build a new restaurant. And when we take a look at this looks like there's quite a bit of discrepancy. Why would it cost $300,000 in some locations and another one maybe $700,000? Well, let's take a look at that. I'm going to start with the minimum of $300,000. Regardless, it's going to cost us $300,000 to develop this location. Typically, whenever we have a franchise location, we have to have certain things. We have to have a place to offer our products. We have to have equipment. We have to have training, etc. So let's take a look. Let's use these assumptions that our leasehold improvements are going to be $100,000, and leasehold improvements we're going to be talking about signage, decorations, things that make the building inhabitable and make it inviting and fit the franchise look. We're going to make the assumption that we're going to have $150,000 in equipment. We're going to have refrigerators, a conveyor belt, maybe a grill, those type of things. So any equipment that we use to prepare the food. We're going to have an opening inventory. We'll use $5,000 for that. We'll have some type of training, $15,000, and then will be other at $30,000. This could be just general working capital, licensing, whatever we're doing here. So that comes up with our $300,000. So any time we open a unit, we're going to have these minimum expenses here. So unless I have $300,000 in my pocket, I'm going to have to borrow some money. So we're going to assume that we need 30% in equity to borrow the $300,000. This means that the owner would need to have $90,000 in cash to borrow the $210,000. Banks typically require that you have a certain percent of equity in the project. Very rarely will they be willing to fund you at 100% of the project. So in order to get my project off, I'm going to need $90,000, and I can use that and borrow the $210,000 to get my location. Okay, so this takes care of our original $300,000. Okay, this leaves us with an additional $400,000 we need to consider. Why would it cost us another $400,000? The biggest difference is going to be the difference between buying a property and building as opposed to leasing. Assume a monthly lease is $3,000 a month. I don't know if this is reasonable or not. I am just using this as a number, so don't try to use this as some kind of plug-in whenever you're deciding whether my note payment is going to be a certain amount of dollars as opposed to a lease payment. I'm just using this as a marker. If I decide to own a location, I'll have to buy the land and the building. So let's make some other assumptions here. I'm going to assume that it's going to cost me $200,000 for the land and $200,000 for the building. And again, I'm going to assume that the lender is going to require 30% equity in the project, and the owner would be required to have $110,000 in cash to put into it. Okay? So, if we lease, we need $90,000 in cash, and we pay a monthly lease payment to a landlord, and we would have a note of $210,000. If we build, we're going to need $210,000 in cash, which is our $90,000 plus the $120,000 for the building project, and would have a note for $490,000, or $210,000 for the leasehold improvements, equipment, etc., and $280,000 for the land and the building project. Before I go on to the second one, a few other things that we need to talk about this. The amount of capital that's required to build a second unit, you'll see, is a minimum of the $90,000, and if we do the full thing, we're going to need $210,000 in cash. So if we're going to do a lease, it's going to take less cash, and it's also going to take us less time. We're more than likely going to be able to find a location, go in, develop the leaseholds, get our people trained, and away we go. So somewhere between 60 and 90 days, once we decide we're going to do this project, we can probably be operating. On the other hand, if I decide to build a location, I may have anywhere from 18 months to 3 years, depending on trying to find a suitable location, trying to get my zoning, getting my architectural designs approved, building the actual location, etc., etc., etc. So one of the things you have to do whenever you're looking at developing a second unit, you're going to have to look at not only the expense, but the time that is going to be taken to do that. And if I'm the owner and I'm going to ramrod this project, then that means that I'm not going to have time, as much time anyway, for some of the projects I had before. So a couple things that you should make a consideration is, does the owner have the extra cash to build the location or to even start the second location? Are you going to assume that if I build this new location, I'm going to produce at least the same sales as my original location? Should I build or lease? If I build, what will be the cost of the project? Okay, this is the one where you'll go through and you're going to have to try to figure that out. I've given you some information on that. Now, one thing I want you to do is give a little bit of consideration that you can get pretty heavy into the weeds coming up with amortization schedules, depreciation, etc. on this. What I want you to do is figure out what it's going to cost you as far as a lease operation or a build operation, and come up with a dollar amount that monthly payment would be. So I'm going to go ahead and set it up, and I'd have my dollar amount, what do we say, $490,000. Let's say $490,000, and I'm going to put the 15-year note on it, and I'm going to come up with whatever the current rate is for commercial lending. This should give me some type of amortization schedule that will tell me what my monthly payment's going to be. For the sake of brevity, I want you to consider that would be similar to what you're going to pay in a lease payment. Okay? So go through, take a look at that. So generally, you're going to spend about the same every month in a note payment and interest as you would a lease payment. Okay. There are times when there's a difference and it can be significant, but in general, let's just use that for the sake of brevity. So really what you're looking at here is, should I even build a second unit? Yes, there are some considerations in there as far as, do I have the equity upfront cash to do the project, etc., etc. But don't get lost in the project of the depreciation is going to be different, etc., etc., etc. Just go ahead and take a look at that and assume that whatever your monthly payment's going to be is going to be similar to what your lease payment's going to be. Okay. The other thing we need to consider here is the time. If the ownership is going to be spending time on the building and developing and that type of thing, who's going to cover his time or take care of his duties? So that becomes an additional issue there. The second thing we're going to look at here, or the second alternative that I'm going to discuss, is increasing promotion. According to the case, Wu has spent no money on advertising or media. He has sought to develop the customer base using social media, and he is the marketing department. The question becomes here, if he's going to increase promotion, how is he going to do that? Is he going to have to add budget for marketing? So if he decides that I'm going to try to increase my social media, or in that fact, if I'm going to increase my budget overall and maybe go to some of the traditional marketing, such as advertising, promotion, and that type of thing, where am I going to put that expense? Okay. It's going to come out of the operation in some way. If Wu decides that he's too valuable in operations, is he going to bring a marketing manager in? So one of two things here. He is either going to need to increase his expenses for marketing, either because he's going to hire somebody or spend more budget on it, or he's going to have to increase his expenses in operations because somebody would have to take his duties at the actual restaurant. So when you go through and look at this, it's going to probably be somewhat of a wash from the standpoint that if I'm going to focus on marketing and I'm going to focus on the media part of it, then I'm going to have to hire somebody in operations. If I'm going to stay in operations, I'm probably going to spend a similar amount of dollars bringing somebody in to run the marketing side of it. And again, it also depends. If I'm going to bring in a marketing manager and I'm going to try to do traditional TV, radio, magazines, etc., I may have a considerably larger budget that I'm going to have to look at. Okay? So where is the time going to come from? Is Wu just going to be able to do this and add to his workload? I don't think so, because the case basically says that he's time-starved right now. Okay, if I increase the marketing budget, will it increase sales? And will the increase in sales justify the increase in expenses? So you're going to have to do two things. You're going to have to figure out how much you're going to add to the marketing budget and how much there's going to be an increase in sales. So you should be able to take a look at that and tell me whether it will increase, won't increase, or it will increase, and how much it will affect the bottom line. The next one is the status quo. Should Wu just keep the operation as is? You can take a look at his existing financial statement we did earlier, and it seemed like he was producing pretty good net income from his operation. And so we take a look at that. Should we really change this? Should we do something different? The one thing that I would put in here is that Wu has basically been in operation for 12 months. And so one of his objectives or one of his desires is to grow and expand this business, but I'm not 100% sure we know much beyond that this location, this concept for the first 12 months seemed to be pretty successful. And so is it something that can be replicated? Can it be duplicated? Not sure. And so one of the things we could do is just say, you know, we may have a long-term strategy alternative to do X, Y, Z, or we may just say, you know, we're going to just see if this project is going to be something that is going to be successful over a period of time. And so the status quo could be an alternative for you. I don't believe that that is something that ownership wants, but it may be something that you recommend. And if you do, you need to make a justification for that instead of just saying, well, you're doing pretty good, so just keep doing what you're doing. So you can suggest the status quo, but you still have to justify it by answering the questions and giving a reason for your recommendation. One other one you may consider here is exit the business. Should Wu consider an exit strategy? Again, it seems to have been a pretty successful operation. It's going along real well. But is it something he wants to continue to do? Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But that is always a strategic alternative, that we may be at the point to where we're doing as well as we're ever going to, and we should consider selling this. And if that's the case, we're going to do everything we can to try to increase our sales, keep our expenses low, and actually market the business for sale as being a successful operation. Again, that's one that if you do that, you'll have to take a look at it and figure out how you're going to bump the sales without a lot of additional expenditure, and how you'd go about marketing that. So those are several alternatives that you can take a look at there. And regardless, you will need to put together the financial information for each one of those, because that is one of the keys whenever you're going through and evaluating alternatives in step 4 and getting ready to make the recommendation.